I'm here to tell the audience that whether he picks Denver or Houston, and we'll discuss where he should pick in a moment, whomever he picks, if it's between those two teams, they immediately become the biggest threat to New England in the AFC. They already got the defense. Both those teams already have the offensive weapons. Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders in Denver, DeAndre Hopkins, Lamar Miller in Houston.
Yes.
Both of those teams, the difference between them competing for a title last year and finishing the season in disappointing fashion as they did last year, was the quarterback position. Either of those teams gets Tony Romo today, they immediately become the biggest threat to New England in the AFC.
And also from an organization standpoint, they match up well. They're not intimidated. Bill O'Brien there in Houston, they are a quarterback away. With a competent quarterback and J.J. Watt added to the #1 defense. In Denver, they have a championship pedigree. John Elway, the ownership there, they're trying to win. They're trying to be in the championship conversation every year. So if they put a quarterback in play with their stellar defense, which led them to a Super Bowl win a couple years ago, yes, it's going to change the arc of the National Football League. But it's also, this is what makes the NFL more exciting than the other professional sports, because the viable options of who can win, who compete against New England, they really do vary, and the excitement around 5 or 6 different NFL cities hinges on them getting a quarterback or getting a player to get them in Super Bowl.
Right, that excitement, though, goes away in Houston if they don't get Tony Romo, because then their other option is try to overpay for Jimmy Garoppolo via trade or run it back with Tom Savage. Like Houston has seen, and this is why, Chris, it is amazing to me that neither Denver nor Houston has stepped up and said to the Dallas Cowboys, fine, we'll give you something. We're not going to wait any longer for the guy to be released. I understand that you would like, in a perfect world, to not have to give up any draft picks and to be able to then negotiate a new contract with Romo. But this isn't a perfect world. Denver and Houston both saw in real time the last few years the difference between, for Denver, having a quarterback and not having a quarterback. Houston hasn't had a quarterback in the history of its franchise, save one Matt Schaub year. It's amazing to me. Neither one of these teams has called up Dallas and said, fine, take our 3rd-round pick. We want this position taken care of.
Well, I think someone did call, and then after what Houston did yesterday by trading Brock to Cleveland, that opened up the opportunities. But there was no need to call before yesterday, because it was pretty much understood that Dallas was going to release Tony Romo with a June 1st designation so they can split the salary cap this season and next season, 10.8 this year and
7 or so next year.
7.8 the following season. So when you know that, there's no need for a trade. But now, after yesterday and what's going on with free agency, they have to be more aggressive today.
The Texans, I like what they did to a degree, because if people don't understand what the Texans did yesterday, they're like, hold on, someone traded for Brock Osweiler? No. The Browns traded for the Texans' 2nd-round pick. They had to give back essentially nothing. What the Browns gave back was they took on the albatross that is Brock Osweiler. So the Texans cut bait a year after signing Brock Osweiler without ever meeting with him. They cut bait on what was one of the worst free agent signings in NFL history. I give them credit for at least recognizing it's a sunk cost. However, they painted themselves into a corner a little bit, because the only reason you give up a 2nd-round pick to clear cap space is if you have someone you intend to spend that cap space on. That's got to be Tony Romo.
Yeah, you would have to target someone. I don't believe that Tony Romo is the only option for the Houston Texans, because I don't believe you run an organization that way. And Tony Romo could easily go to Denver, or they could trade him somewhere else. I believe that they have a couple different options, and I believe that Jimmy Garoppolo, with his background being with Bill O'Brien and New England, running that system, I believe he is part of the equation.
Here's the issue with Jimmy Garoppolo. First of all,
this is the issue for you, or this is the issue for Jimmy Garoppolo?
I think you're going to agree it's an issue with Jimmy Garoppolo.
Okay, why don't you say it first before you be predicting me agreeing with
I think I know you pretty well. If you trade for Jimmy Garoppolo, you have to give him a new deal, correct?
Yes.
If you're trading for him, you are trading for him, and before the season starts, you are signing him to a big-time deal.
No doubt.
So the Texans, if they trade for Garoppolo, in addition to having to give up probably a 1st-round pick,
they have to at least give up a 1st round.
Right. So then they also have to risk making the same Osweiler mistake again, which is giving enormous guaranteed money to an unproven player. Jimmy Garoppolo's played 7 NFL quarters.
Right.
Even Osweiler played more than that.
Well, this is the thing that Houston is in a different position. At least they have eyeballs in the franchise that had eyeballs on the prospect for a long period of time.
That's fair.
So it's their evaluation process is totally different because they were there, Bill O'Brien, when he got there.
Right.
So they're understanding and what they want him to do compared to them trying to force Osweiler to do things, which we saw was a disaster last season. At least you know. And that's what free agency, where a lot of teams get tricked. They spend this money and they equate to money to being a perfect player. We're all flawed players. Barry Sanders is one of the few players. Jim Brown is one of the few players that they can play in any type of system. The rest of us, we need a system. And Jimmy Garoppolo needs a system, or he could be a colossal failure. So I think that their chance of making a mistake are less than they were with Brock because they know more about the talent.
Because Bill O'Brien, if people don't know, was in New England. So much of the staff was in New England. Bill O'Brien runs the same offensive system that Jimmy Garoppolo was running in New England. So that part's all true. Here's another part to bring us back to where we started this. New England feels like this unbeatable team, and they are the greatest football dynasty to me of the modern era. Post 70s Steelers. To me, they have now passed up what the Cowboys did in the 90s, even what the Niners did in the 80s. I think it's these New England Patriots.
Because of longevity.
Exactly right. With that said, this sounds funny to say, New England's only been to 7 Super Bowls. And by that, I mean this. They make 1 and 2. Like, it's a 50-50. Brady's been there just over 15 years.
Yes.
1 out of every 2 years, they make it. That's an insane accomplishment. But it's not LeBron in the East. It's not like what are we doing here? We know we're not making we're not making the finals. No, there are other teams in the AFC that can make the Super Bowl, and I'm sitting here telling you, with Big Ben clearly on the decline, with the rest of the AFC West, they don't have. To me, the Chiefs don't have their quarterback, and the Raiders aren't quite there yet. If the Broncos or the Texans got Tony Romo, and you were to say the Patriots don't make the Super Bowl, who does? I would say whichever of those teams got Tony Romo. And you were telling me before, the Broncos can't block the Texans up front.
No.
You don't know if they can block the Broncos up front.
No, absolutely not. But also, when you look at what's happened over the last 20 years in the AFC, you mentioned LeBron and his dominance over the East. If you look at the quarterbacks, besides Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and Ben Roethlisberger, there hadn't been
just Joe Flacco, right?
Yes, there hadn't been quarterbacks who've been able to make multiple trips to the AFC Championship because of their overall dominance. But it's amazing that if you put a quarterback like Tony Romo on either one of these teams for the next 2 or 3 years, they're going to be fighting New England for home field advantage and fighting them to see who's going to be the dominant team in the AFC.
And again, I know Romo hasn't played in a couple years. I mean, he looked nice in that one drive in Week 17. A healthy Tony Romo is the second best quarterback in the AFC. And with the way I saw Big Ben deteriorate as the year went on, with the just ubiquitous weapons everywhere. I mean, he had Le'Veon Bell, he has Antonio Brown. I think I am comfortable saying that if you tell me Tony Romo is going to be healthy, and I know that's the elephant in the room, that's the big question mark, is he going to be healthy? If he's healthy, the only quarterback in the entire conference that's better than him is Tom Brady. Now, I feel like Houston has almost cornered themselves to where you mentioned Garoppolo, and I get it, but their fans are expecting Romo. I think some of those players are expecting Romo.
And I think Romo wants to go to Houston.
Makes sense. The division's easier. I know it's easier path to a top seed, which we've talked about. You get to play in warm weather or indoors. There's not as many fierce pass rushers in that division as there is the
AFC South.
I think the AFC South is the worst division in football, and I think the AFC West is the best division in football.
Probably the most balanced and most competitive, yes.
Right? So for all those reasons, if Romo does get released, if it's not a trade, I think the obvious pick is Houston. The weapons are about, I guess Denver's got slightly better pair of wide receivers with Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, but DeAndre Hopkins is the best singular player of the 2 wide receiver cores. And if you really if you're Tony Romo, if you're the Texans and you're actually going to try to beat the Pats, obviously the easiest way there is the 1 seed. You have such a better chance getting the 1 seed out of the AFC South.